Thank you, Acting Deputy President. And I'm pleased to rise tonight to speak on this bill because I smell a rat. I smell a rat. And you've only got to look at the history of the Albanese government when it comes to transparency to know that somewhere, somehow, they are cooking the books. Now, in my prior career, I was an accountant, and one of the things we were taught in my professional years is that we've got to look at substance over form, statement of accounting concept number 4. When you're looking at a balance sheet, when you're looking at financial statements, you've got to look at what's really going on. Many people might know it as reading between the lines. And what we've got here is a government that is going to spend $1 billion. That's right, Dr. Evil, $1 billion on basically doing the old bait and switch. What they want to do is that we've currently got 340 people working on the AAT, and they want to pull out the 160 or so people that weren't appointed by them, that weren't appointed by the Labor government. Because if you know anything about Labor, the Labor Party, they are all about command and control. They will not allow any independent thinking on any government body whatsoever. And we have evidence of that. Just in the recent parliamentary break, we discovered, thanks to an FOI by Senator Patterson, that the Prime Minister's office himself released a document explaining to bureaucrats and people who take answers in estimates how not to answer the question. Okay? This is a government that hates transparency and hates accountability. And there is a conga line of examples when we look at this. One of the first things Prime Minister Albanese said he would do when he got into government was release the minutes of National Cabinet. And of course he wouldn't do that, would he? He wouldn't do that. Okay, he called out Prime Minister Morrison, and I called out Prime Minister Morrison for not releasing the minutes of National Cabinet. That hideous Frankenstein creature that locked us down for 2 years through those horrible years of COVID. They need to be held to account. Of course, that's not all, though. When we wanted information on the vaccine contracts, every Tuesday, Transmission Tuesday, we want an inquiry into renewables, as to the impact of renewables on our farmland, on our fisheries, we cannot get any transparency. And what else do we have here? We wanted an inquiry into childhood transitioning, whether or not that deserved scrutiny. That too was shut down. When we wanted more information on Brittany Higgins and the $2 million or the X millions of dollars paid out to her, shut down. And that deserves scrutiny because in a recent court case the judge actually said Fiona Brown, Linda Reynolds' Chief of Staff, acted sensibly. Serious questions need to be asked of this government, but yet again they are not interested in transparency. And then we've got to look at how they love to stack the board with their mates. One of the first things that the current Treasurer did when he got into office was put Iain Ross on the RBA board. Now, Iain Ross was the former head of the Fairwork Commission, the Fairwork Commission that was supposed to stand up for employees, but of course they threw employees under the bus in COVID. But there was more to that. Iain Ross, of course, was one of the architects with Bill Kelty and Paul Keating of superannuation, another form of mandate, another form of wage theft, whereby there was no transparency about superannuation, there was no inquiry, no referendum as to whether or not people wanted 12% of their income taken from them and given to their mates, Labor's mates in Sydney and Melbourne in the ivory palaces there. No transparency, no scrutiny. We'll just start it off at 2% and slowly creep it up to 12%, because that is the way the Labor Party operate. And that is why we have to look at the substance over form. Why are they spending $1 billion on changing the name of a tribunal that does very important work in assessing whether or not the bureaucrats in the government make proper administrative procedures. What is it that they are trying to hide? Because we know that the Labor Party love to hide information. They love not to hold the bureaucrats to account. We see that all the time in estimates. Whenever we ask questions, don't want to answer it, don't want to answer it. So I think we need greater scrutiny. And even tonight, my colleague Senator Scarr pointed out how they had very, very little time to actually review this bill. After a number of days of an inquiry, suddenly this bill, and the committee hasn't even had time to hand down their report, this bill is being rushed into parliament so that it cannot get adequate scrutiny. And yet again, it's this constant theme of being sneaky. Prime Minister Albanese really cannot explain, and the Attorney-General, Mr Dreyfus, cannot explain what is the rush. What is the rush? And when this new creation will be brought back to life, of course, it's going to actually cost more to have your rights to get to have what the bureaucrats decided. It's going to cost you more to actually get the bureaucrats held to account. So it's going to be even harder for the average Joe in the public, out there in the public, to access their right to natural justice. But yet again, this is what the Labor Party do. And I ask myself, why do you have to go and sack 50% of the AAT because they weren't appointed by Labor? You could have just played the long game here and eventually put your own appointees in there. I mean, it's not like we don't do that. I mean, Tony Abbott put in the next Labor staffer as the head of the Audit Office, okay? The Auditor-General. And when he actually came out and told false, made lies about the purchase of the Western Sydney Airport, we held him to account here in the Senate. I held him to account. He claimed that paying $3 million for 30 acres of flat land in Western Sydney was somehow criminal. What he didn't say to the people was that Paul Keating, in 1995, when he was Prime Minister, paid $130 million for land at the Western Sydney Airport. That was only reported in the balance sheet at $30 million. But of course all that was put aside because the Auditor-General abused his position to actually make a whole swathe of lies that he was never held accountable for. Well, let me tell you, Labor, that if you think that you're just going to rush this through parliament without adequate scrutiny, you can think again. And I'd like to think that the Greens, in order to honour transparency, in the name of transparency, vote against this bill, vote against rushing it through parliament so that we can have a better look. Because, yet again, $1 billion is getting wasted on nothing more than a shuffle, a bait and switch whereby they put their mates on the board. We've seen it with the Governor-General. She's now the new soon-to-be Governor-General, an ex-Keating staffer. I well remember another Keating staffer, Bill Botel. I was listening to ABC National coming back from doing laps in the morning one morning before COVID, and a bloke called Bill Botel was telling everyone that we had to lock the country down. I thought, who's this doctor? And of course, I googled his name. Turns out he's an ex-Paul Keating staffer. Likewise, with Qantas, member of that board, ex-Paul Keating staffer. Labor have a history of appointing their mates to positions of power and authority. And what we need to know here is why are they wasting $1 billion of taxpayer funds, plus the inconvenience of all the outstanding cases. I think there's tens of thousands of outstanding cases that may have to be reheld again or started off from scratch again for those poor people out there, the battler, who's probably been shafted by some tyrannical bureaucrat where the power's gone to their head. And I mean, heavens no, we deal with these people every day. Every day. I am contacted by people who've had unfair decisions handed down to them by the bureaucracy, whether it's the tax office, whether it's NDIS, whether it's people suffering from the vaccine injury scheme, all the time. I mean, I've been given tape recordings of whereby bureaucrats are mocking where they didn't realise they hadn't hung up the phone properly, and they are mocking people who've rung that person for help. Now, that's the sort of, and I'm not saying all the bureaucrats are bad, but we need to have a level of review, and obviously there's only 227 politicians at the federal level. We can't be across every decision, administrative decision made every week by the tens of thousands of bureaucrats in this country. But we need to know that we have a impartial and independent appeals tribunal that is going to give the battler out there their natural justice. The battler who pays taxes to the government in return for services, in return for being treated like a human being. And that's probably been the hardest aspect of this role, and my role as a senator, is talking to constituents daily who are absolutely gobsmacked at the way they get treated by their government and the arrogance of the bureaucrats. It's one of the reasons why my questioning and estimates does so well on social media, because so many people can relate to being shafted by the government, because so many people out there are shafted by the government and the big engine of bureaucracy every day. And no, Senator Watt, it's not a laughing matter. It is very, very serious. And this contemptuous, patronising attitude by bureaucrats has to be held to account. It has to be held to account by people who are going to put the interests of the people. That is what democracy is, for the people, by the people. It's not for the bureaucrats, it's not for the big end of town, by the big end of town, for the big end of town. And we see that all the time with the Labor government. Just last night's budget, we got $20 billion for critical industries, green hydrogen, for their mates, the billionaires, Andrew Forrest, bureaucrats, big end-of-town bureaucrats looking after big end-of-town blowhards. Well, let me tell you, the Australian people are sick and tired of it. They're sick of the lack of transparency. They're sick of the patronising attitude, the callous indifference to people who've got shafted by the government and then the government kicks them to the curb. We saw that with the vaccine injured. They were mocked as being anti-vaxxers. How disgusting. And they're still mocked. How disgusting. And let me tell you, people are waking up. They know that the government should serve the people, and it's not doing that. So the question is, why is the Albanese government wasting $1 billion to do nothing more than a bait and switch, to basically rebrand a whole new department, sack everyone and then recruit everyone again, disrupting the appeals process? Heavens know how much backlog this is going to cause. It's going to end up costing more. People are now going to have to pay more. Why? I'll tell you why. Because Labor are up to something. They're looking after their mates at the big end of town like they always do.
Yeah.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chermside.